point of death, what happens afterwards?
Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Haunted Places and Coffee. Thank you very much for joining me once again to explore another haunted place while enjoying some coffee. Today's coffee is an iced campfire mocha from Caribou Coffee with milk chocolate and oat milk, and it is absolutely delicious. And today's coffee mug is actually pertinent to the haunted location that we're covering today. It is my Ohio State Reformatory mug that is black on the outside and orange on the inside. I actually have two coffee mugs from this location, and this is the other one. It says, "Welcome to Shawshank." So today we will be visiting the Ohio State Reformatory, which I'm sure a lot of you have actually heard of before. The Ohio State Reformatory is in Mansfield, Ohio. Yes, we're back in Ohio today. I'm sorry, but I know a little bit something about this location, having grown up near it and visited it a few times. The Ohio State Reformatory was built between 1886 and 1910. So construction started in 1886, but wasn't actually completed until 1910 because the construction kept getting delayed due to funding problems. So in 1862, actually, the field where the Ohio State Reformatory now stands used to be used as a training camp for Civil War soldiers. And the camp was called Camp Mordecai Bartley for the governor of Ohio in the 1840s. So in 1867, they decided to use this land to build a prison, and it was originally called the Intermediate Penitentiary. The Intermediate Penitentiary. I'm going to say reformatory because apparently I can't pronounce penitentiary to save my life. So they purchased 30 acres of land and 150 of surrounding acres, and in total it cost them about $1.3 million. And the original architect was Levi T. Schofield, I hope I said that right, of Cleveland, Ohio, and he used three different architectural styles when constructing the prison: Victorian Gothic, Richardsonian Romanesque, and Queen Anne. And the purpose of using these three different architectural styles that were very appealing and aesthetically pleasing was to help encourage the inmates to become like spiritually reborn during their reformation in the penitentiary. So in 1896, the Ohio State Reformatory got its first 150 prisoners, and they were shipped from Columbus, Ohio on a bus and taken to be prisoners there. And they spent their first few years at the penitentiary working on constructing the reformatory's sewer systems, as well as the 25-foot stone wall around the perimeter, which is no longer standing today. So the Ohio State Reformatory remained open and active until December 1999, when a federal court order had it closed down. And the reason for this was they were mostly citing overcrowding within the reformatory, as well as inhumane conditions. And if you have ever been to the reformatory, you can see it for yourself. Those cells are tiny. My boyfriend and I actually visited the reformatory last year, and we took a lot of video, and you had an opportunity, like a lot of the cells in the East Cell block were open, and you could go in and like check it out. I'm gonna be brave and go into one of these cells. Oh my God, it's so tiny. It's so tiny. Oh my gosh, my shoulders are barely like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, I can barely turn around holding the camera. And that's it. Oh God. I walked in there. I'm a small person, okay? I'm 5'2", about 125 pounds. I am a small person. I'm nowhere near a full grown man. And I was cramped when I went into that cell block. I was like, I would go crazy in here. And not only did they just have the one prisoner in there, they had two. They had the bunk beds. There is definitely not enough room for one human being in one of those cells, let alone two at the same time. So yeah, I can absolutely understand the inhumane conditions. So over the 94 years that the Ohio State Reformatory was in operation, it has seen approximately 154,000 prisoners. And in that time span, over 200 people have died in the reformatory. And not all of them prisoners. A couple of them were actually guards who were killed by inmates during an escaped attempt. And one of them was actually the warden in 1959 Arthur Gladkey. He actually died from a heart attack while just working in his office that was in the quarters of the Ohio State Reformatory, as well as his wife, who died before him actually, but she died in the quarters as well, in their living quarters that is housed in the Ohio State Reformatory. Due to a freak accident, she was rummaging through a jewelry box, happened to unearth a hidden handgun that was in there, and it kind of flipped out of the box, landed on the floor and discharged accidentally, and the bullet actually hit her and the wound was fatal. So most of the grounds since the reformatory shut down in 1990 were actually demolished, including the outer wall that I told you about earlier there. However, in 1995 it was turned into a museum, and they have the museum set up mostly in like the warden's quarters, the living quarters of where the warden and the guards, maybe the guards, I'm not sure, but the warden definitely lived there with his family and the offices and everything. And that's where like the museum part is, but you can also tour the prison itself and see the East Cell Block, the library and the infirmary and solitary confinement and the shower area and all that. They also host ghost hunts, paranormal investigations, all kinds of events, like they have a murder dinner mystery thing, they have tattoo festivals. Side note, on one of my visits to the Ohio State Reformatory, I did go to one of the tattoo festivals. It was called Ink in the Clink. It has now been changed to Inkcarceration. I'm pretty sure that it's put on by different people now, which is why the name changed. But when I went, it was called Ink in the Clink. And I had the pleasure of being tattooed inside the Ohio State Reformatory. This is so bloody right here. It's awesome. Got the tattoo. Heading home now. Had a lot of fun. It's definitely worth the 25 bucks. And this is that tattoo. I got a Grim Reaper mouse. It's very hard to see because my arm does not bend that way. That was a pretty cool personal experience of mine. I know in the late 90s they used to do this thing where you could pay a fee to stay in one of the cells overnight, but they stopped doing that, I think because it was sort of a safety risk and liability, because the conditions of the prison itself, probably the cells and everything else, you know, just too much of a liability and a safety risk, which I completely understand. I mean, you could probably get tetanus very easily from just touching one of those bars because it's in pretty bad disrepair at this point. And just as a fun little fact here, the East Cell Block of the Ohio State Reformatory remains the largest freestanding steel cell block in the world at 6 tiers high. And let me tell you what, when you go in there and you see it for yourself and you just look up and you see all those levels of cells, it's very overwhelming. Definitely gives you the creeps. It is creepy. So even if you've never actually heard of the Ohio State Reformatory, certainly it must be ringing a little bit of a bell with the images that you've been seeing, because it has been featured and was the main character in several movies, music videos, and photo shoots. Most notably, if you did not pick up on it before from this mug here that I showed you, it is, I want to say, the main character in the movie The Shawshank Redemption. And I did hear while we were on tour there that the Shawshank Redemption kind of pretty much brought the prison sort of back to life, because they were going to demolish it entirely because it was in such bad disrepair. The movie drew more attention to it, more focus to it, gave it new purpose and life, so to speak. So that's why in 1995 they decided to start the Historical Society and start funding to keep it going and make it a museum and do tours and things like that. So not only was the prison featured in the Shawshank Redemption, it was actually in Air Force One as well. Like the Russian prison where Ivan is in prison. Yeah, that was shot at the Ohio State Reformatory. It's been in dozens of movies. Like I can't sit here and list all of them, but if you're interested, look it up. It's probably been in some of your favorite movies and you didn't even notice, just like here and there, like little blips or whatever, right? But the coolest ones that I thought was it was actually the setting for Godsmack's Awake music video. And also Marilyn Manson had a promo photography shoot there because he actually was born in Canton, Ohio. I learned that on my research. I did not previously know that. So among the over 200 people who died in the reformatory, several of them obviously were inmates. One inmate managed to hang himself in his cell, which was unheard of at the time because they had, it was really hard to get away with stuff there because the cells were so small and always on guard, and you just couldn't get away with stuff. So somehow he managed to hang himself in his cell. One inmate managed to set himself on fire and died that way. There was another instance of 2 inmates being in solitary confinement at the same time, which I don't quite understand, but apparently only one of them walked out. The one who lived, he had left his cellmate stuffed under the bed, under the mattress of his bunk bed. So they don't really know what happened there, but I think it's pretty obvious. He probably went crazy and killed him and then just decided to stuff him under the bed because why wouldn't you, right? So there's tons of activity in this prison. And I know it was featured on an episode of Ghost Hunters, if you guys have ever watched that. And I found that episode particularly interesting as I'm very familiar with the reformatory. I've been there 3 times now. So there's lots of hot spots for paranormal activity in the reformatory, and I can vouch for pretty much all of them, having toured the building 3 times now myself. And yeah, it's spooky and you get weird feelings. Like, you just get really weird feelings that you can't explain in several areas of the prison. I went in not really knowing where the activity was because I don't like to be swayed or have the power of suggestion take over my brain, right? I just kind of like to see what happens, then look it up later and see if what I experienced corresponded. And yeah, it did. So the infirmary in the reformatory, okay? Lots of inmates passed away. Obviously a lot from illness, infection, malnutrition, disease. Some of them even starved to death because some of the inmates would steal food from the weaker inmates. So some of them would just starve to death, and that's how they died. So in the infirmary, if you go in there, you can expect to encounter mysterious, unexplained gusts of wind. People have found orb clusters when they go around and they take pictures and they see orbs in the photographs later. And it's also been reported that people have heard the disembodied moaning of the spirits and the inmates in agony while they were suffering while they were in the infirmary. And the infirmary is one area that I went into, I immediately felt uncomfortable. I remember going in there, I did not want to move. I did not want to take a single further step into that room. I felt really uncomfortable when I went in there, and I didn't know any of this going in. I had no idea the infirmary was a hot spot. I knew that the prison was allegedly haunted. I knew that the prison had paranormal activity and ghostly activity. Of course, everyone knows that. When you grow up in my area, you hear this stuff, you just know about it. But I had no idea the infirmary was a hot spot. And when I went in there, I didn't want to walk in. It just felt awful. When you go on the tour, the chapel is really obvious because, it has windows and the pews and everything in there, and it's very obviously a chapel. But when you go into the other rooms, it's just these big, empty, cold stone rooms with just debris all over the floor, and the paint is peeling in the walls, and it's just very creepy all around. But you don't really know what room of the prison that you're in because they're not active anymore, they're not functioning, so there's no furniture to indicate what room you're in. It's just a big empty room. So allegedly in the library of the reformatory, which I'm not even sure where it is, if I've even been in there, again, I don't know if the rooms are labeled, they're not labeled well, or I didn't notice it at the time, I'm not sure. But allegedly in the library, a phantom of a young woman called Helen, who wasn't an inmate herself, but she was an infirmary nurse, and she was murdered by 2 inmates, and her ghost is said to still haunt the library, the whole reformatory, but mostly the library. The warden's quarters also have been a hotspot for paranormal activity. You can supposedly hear Gladkey, the warden who had a heart attack in his office, having an argument with his wife. His wife is the one who died tragically by accident, by the gun accidentally discharging when she was rifling through the jewelry box. Yeah, supposedly you can hear them arguing and having heated conversations. You can hear the warden's footsteps going up and down the hallway. And it's also said that this is where you will experience a lot of camera malfunctioning, like the shutter not working properly, the battery draining, picture coming out funny. So a lot of cameras malfunction in the warden's quarters in this area, specifically the warden's wife's room. So the activity isn't limited to the prison itself. It's also in the offices and the living quarters, including the 3rd floor middle administration offices area. People have reported shadow people, audible voices, disembodied footsteps, and just that overall creepy feeling of I'm not alone. I'm being watched. It's a little bit difficult to feel that when you're taking one of the tours because there's a lot of hustle and bustle. There's a lot of people filtering in and out. So I feel like doing one of their nighttime ghost hunts or paranormal investigations overnight would probably spark up, you know, a little more activity and you'd be a little more aware of it. But yeah, it's really hard during the day when you're taking a tour and there's just all these people funneling in and out of the rooms and, you know, in the daytime, and it's so cluttered, and yeah, it's a little disappointing as far as that goes. But once you get out into the main prison, you can disperse a little bit more, go find little nooks to explore and everything like that, and that is when you really feel creeped out. It's so strange. Another hotspot is the chapel. And I just talked about the chapel, but apparently it wasn't always a chapel. It actually used to be the place where the inmates were unofficially executed and then was turned into a chapel. So there's a lot of negative energy in the chapel, and I can imagine why. And allegedly people in this space have been grabbed because the spirits in this particular area are very aggressive. I mean, they were executed inmates from the prison, you know, who are trapped in this room. So I can imagine them being very aggressive and grabby. There's lots of unexplained noises, and you can see like figures in doorways, you know, just very uneasy in there. I can vouch for the fact that the chapel does feel a little uneasy. I thought it was strange when I went in there because it's like the first place that you go into after you leave the warden's quarters and the administration offices area on the tour. You kind of go into the chapel first. I always thought it was strange in there. It didn't feel pleasant and positive the way a chapel, a religious-based room and spiritual area, like in a good way, would feel. It just felt heavy and morose, and yeah, it doesn't feel good in that room. It really doesn't. I mean, it's a pretty room, sort of. I mean, it's in obviously really bad disrepair at this point, but yeah, I mean, that explains it. I did not know this until I did my research for this video, that didn't used to be the chapel, and it used to be where they unofficially executed the inmates. I did not know that before, but now I'm finding out, and that explains why I always felt real weird when I went into the chapel, because I'm like, this doesn't feel like where people went to pray and feel good and connect with like deities, you know, like this feels like a bad room. And I just kind of dismissed it. I'm like, well, I'm at the Ohio State Reformatory, it's haunted. This whole place is gonna feel bad. It was a prison, for crying out loud, right? So yeah, okay, another hotspot obviously is the cell blocks themselves, the east and west cell blocks. Yeah, the cell blocks themselves obviously are steaming with activity because this is where the inmates stayed, and there were lots of murders and suicides and just overall negative energy, you know, because of the conditions and the aggression that I'm sure that the criminals had within them already. So the activity in the cell blocks is aggressive, again, just kind of like the chapel. Like, people get like grabbed, pushed, shoved, they feel breath on their face, they get touched on the shoulder, you know, by unseen hands. There was even a couple of people who got thrown down the stairs by entities, supposedly. You also might feel a sensation of choking all of a sudden, unexplained, and you might see apparitions, of course, and spectral mists. But the most terrifying area of the entire reformatory, and I can vouch for this myself, is solitary confinement. This area is creepy. But yeah, when I went down to explore the solitary confinement area, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, oh, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. The dread, it's just like a thick soup of negative dread energy. It's, oh goodness, yeah, I'm getting goosebumps just remembering. Just in case you don't know what solitary confinement is, also referred to as the hole, it's when prisoners need an extra prison inside of a prison for whatever reason, and they lock them away in this single little cell with no light, no access to anyone, in like the basement away from everybody else. And it's exactly what it sounds like, solitary confinement. And they kept them in there for however long they felt they needed to be in there. And most people would, go crazy. They were driven to absolute lunacy, and a lot of them committed suicide while inside the solitary confinement, just to escape the torturous conditions. So yeah, if you go down into the solitary confinement area of the prison, people have felt nauseous, they get chills, they just feel uneasy, just like what I was talking about. That's exactly how I felt when I went down there. I didn't get nauseous, but I definitely got the chills. Even remembering it right now, the chills came back. Definitely felt uneasy. You can hear voices in the form of like moaning and deranged babbling. All around unpleasant sounds from the spirits of these people who went through this mental anguish down in solitary confinement and ultimately committed suicide, a lot of them in the end. So the Ohio State Reformatory is still open today. In fact, it is thriving. They've added a lot more information and artifacts to their museum within the warden's quarters and the administration offices area, which is where, again, most of the museum is held. You can still tour the rest of the prison, like the cell blocks. You can see the shower area, the infirmary, the library. As far as I know, you can still go down to solitary confinement. I don't think it was open when my boyfriend and I went last year, but I'm pretty sure that's just because of COVID stuff. You can go to one of their festivals, you can set up a ghost hunt, you can set up like a little paranormal investigation thing, and all of the money that they make from all of this goes towards the funding to keep it open and keep it restored and in good enough shape so that the public can still enjoy it for hopefully many years to come. And now they have an additional part of the museum / tours called the Shawshank Trail. You can sort of follow the movie sites that like were used in the Shawshank Redemption movie and show where like parts of it were filmed and everything, because a lot of it was filmed in the surrounding areas there, not just at the prison. And fun fact, if you've seen the Shawshank Redemption, the boarding house room where Brooks stayed once he got out, spoiler alert, was actually filmed inside the prison too. It was filmed in the living quarters of the warden, and you can see that. In fact, the part where he carved "Brooks was here" into the wood and then put "so was red" underneath it, that was originally still there. For some reason they decided to take it down. However, they do have the original carving on display in the museum, so you can see it, and they sort of restored it. So if you go into that room where Brooks stayed, you can see that it says "Brooks was here, so was red." It is carved on that little beam in the ceiling. And they do have other props from the movie. They've got the tunnel that Andy Dufresne crawled through, and they've got like the sewer, the part of the sewer. And in the museum, like not even about the Shawshank Redemption, but in the museum they've got lots of tools that were used back in the day during the prison times and even at the prison. And they've got some of the original things from some of the wardens over the years and some of the things that the inmates used. And it's just very interesting. It's a very interesting step into history and learning about the things that have gone on there at the Reformatory over the years. And it's a very spooky place. So if you ever do get a chance to go to Mansfield, Ohio and visit the Ohio State Reformatory, I highly recommend it. It is incredibly worth it. It's so creepy. You really just can feel it when you're in there. You can just feel every ounce of despair. And I know that doesn't sound appealing, but I mean, it's palpable. You feel it. So that's our video today on the Ohio State Reformatory. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining me once again on Haunted Places and Coffee. And I will see you guys next time. And don't forget to leave suggestions of haunted places that you want me to cover in the comments below. Make sure to leave me your feedback so that I know if I'm doing a good job or not. I really hope I am. I hope you guys are enjoying this series. Thanks for watching. Stay spooky, my friends.